Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now, and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to give Sleepy Time Tales a few nights to get used to the slightly strange idea and make some adjustments, but I believe it will be well worth your while. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. But before we get to tonight's story, I need to ask for a couple of minutes of your time. If you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, and it helps you to get a restful night, and you would like to help me keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, and you have the means to provide support, please consider signing up on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that helps me keep the lights on and gets you bonuses based on your contribution level. And you can sign up from as little as $2 a month, but $5 is where you get a lot of really cool stuff. And of course, if monthly is a big ask because times are hard, you can make once-off contributions to the tip jar on the website. I've spoken a bit recently that I've been struggling to justify keeping Sleepy Time Tales going as support has fallen off despite the audience growing. So I'm very thankful to the listeners who have stepped up and either signed up for the Patreon or thrown something in the tip jar. New Patreon supporters I'd like to thank are Sandra, Gillian and Katie and her little guy, who find the show useful enough that they thought it was worth their providing some monthly support. And shout out as well to John, who is a repeat supporter via the tip jar. A huge thanks to all of you. To emphasize, if you can't afford to make any contributions, please don't feel guilted into it. Times are tough for a lot of people. But what you can do is simply spread the word. If you find the show useful, tell others about it and help me to reach more people. But if a few more of the thousands of you that listen every week can kick in the price of a cup of coffee once a month, I can keep this going and hopefully even expand it, because I have always had big plans for Sleepy Time Tales. So if you can help me with that, I would really love it. Alright, enough of that. Let's go back to the show. Thank you. We return to the description of a new world called the Blazing World by Duchess Margaret Cavendish of Newcastle. Then the Empress inquired of them the reason why springs were not as salt as the sea is. Also, why did some ebb and flow? To which it was answered that the ebbing and flowing of some springs was caused by hollow caverns within the earth, where the sea water crowding through did thrust forward and drew backward the spring water, according to its own way of ebbing and flowing. But others said that it proceeded from a small proportion of saline and acid particles, which the spring water imbibed from the earth. And although it was not so much as to be perceived by the sense of taste, yet it was enough to cause an ebbing and flowing motion. And as for the spring water being fresh, they gave, according to their observation, this following reason. There is, said they, a certain heat within the bowels of the earth, proceeding from its swift circular motion upon its own axis, which heat distills the rarest parts of the earth into a fresh and insipid water, which water, being through the pores of the earth, conveyed into a place where it may break forth without resistance or obstruction, causes springs and fountains, And these distilled waters within the earth do nourish and refresh the grosser and drier parts thereof. This relation confirmed the Empress in the opinion concerning the motion of the earth and the fixedness of the sun, as the birdmen had informed her. And then she asked the worm-men whether minerals and vegetables were generated by the same heat that is within the bowels of the earth, to which they could give her no positive answer. Only this they affirmed, that heat and cold were not the primary producing causes of either vegetables or minerals, or other sorts of creatures, but only effects. And to prove this our assertion, said they, we have observed that by change of some sorts of corporeal motions, that which is now hot will become cold, and what is now cold will grow hot. But the hottest place of all we find to be the centre of the earth. Neither do we observe that the torrid zone does not contain so much gold and silver as the temperate, nor is there great store of iron and lead, wheresoever there is gold. For these metals are most found in colder climates towards either of the poles. This observation the Empress commanded them to confer with her chemists, the ape-men, to let them know that gold was not produced by a violent but temperate degree of heat. She asked further whether gold could not be made by art. They answered that they could not certainly tell Her Majesty, but if it was possible to be done, they thought tin, lead, brass, iron, and silver to be the fittest metals for such an artificial transmutation. Then she asked them whether art could produce iron, tin, lead, or silver. They answered not in their opinion. Then I perceive, replied the Empress, that your judgments are very irregular, since you believe that gold, which is so fixed a metal that nothing has been found as yet, which could occasion a dissolution of its interior figure, may be made by art, and not tin, lead, iron, copper, or silver, which yet are so far weaker and meaner metals than gold is. But the worm-men excused themselves that they were ignorant in that art, and that such questions belonged more properly to the ape-men, who were Her Majesty's chemists. Then the Empress asked them whether by their sensitive perceptions they could observe the interior, corporeal, figurative motions both of vegetables and minerals. They answered that their senses could perceive them after they were produced, but not before. Nevertheless, said they, although the interior figurative motions of natural creatures are not subject to the exterior, animal, sensitive perceptions, yet by their rational perception they may judge of them, and of their productions, if they be regular. Whereupon the Empress commanded the bear-men to lend them some of their best microscopes, at which the bear-men smilingly answered Her Majesty that their glasses would do them but little service in the bowels of the earth, because there was no light. For, said they, our glasses do only represent exterior objects, according to the various reflections and positions of light. And wheresoever light is wanting, the glasses will do no good. To which the worm-men replied that although they could not say much of refractions, reflections, inflections, and the like, yet they were not blind, even in the bowels of the earth, for they could see the several sorts of minerals, as also minute animals that lived there, which minute animal creatures were not blind neither, but had some kind of sensitive perception that was as serviceable to them as sight, taste, smell, touch, hearing, etc., was to other animal creatures. By which it is evident that nature has been as bountiful to those creatures that live underground or in the bowels of the earth, as to those that live upon the surface of the earth, or in the air and water. But howsoever, proceeded the worm-men, although there is light in the bowels of the earth, yet your microscopes will do but little good there, by reason those creatures that live underground have not such optic sense as those that live on the surface of the earth. Wherefore, unless you had glasses as are proper for their perception, your microscopes will not be any ways advantageous to them. The Empress seemed well pleased with this answer of the worm-men, and asked them further, whether minerals, and all other creatures within the earth, were colourless. At which question they could not forbear laughing, and when the Empress asked the reason why they laughed, "We most humbly beg your Majesty's pardon," replied they, "for we could not choose but laugh, when we heard of a colourless body." "Why," said the Empress, "colour is only an accident, which is an immaterial thing, and has no being of itself, but in another body." "Those," replied they, "that informed your Majesty thus, surely the rational motions were very irregular. For how is it possible that a natural nothing can have a being in nature? If it be no substance, it cannot have a being, and if no being, it is nothing. Wherefore the distinction between subsisting of itself and subsisting in another body is a mere nicety and nonsense. For there is nothing in nature that can subsist of or by itself, I mean singly. By reason, all parts of nature are composed in one body, and though they may be infinitely divided, commixed and changed in their particular, yet in general, parts cannot be separated from parts as long as nature lasts. Nay, we might as probably affirm that infinite nature would be as soon destroyed as that one atom could perish. And therefore your Majesty may firmly believe that there is no body without colour, nor no colour without body. For colour, figure, place, magnitude, and body are all but one thing, without any separation or abstraction from each other." The Empress was so wonderfully taken with this discourse of the worm-men, that she not only pardoned the rudeness they committed in laughing at first at her question, but yielded a full assent to their opinion, which she thought the most rational that ever she had heard yet, and then proceeding in her questions, inquired further whether they had observed any seminal principles within the earth, free from all dimensions and qualities, which produced vegetables, minerals, and the like. To which they answered, that concerning the seeds of minerals, their sensitive perceptions had never observed any, but vegetables had certain seeds out of which they were produced. Then she asked whether those seeds of vegetables lost their species, that is, were annihilated in the production of their offspring. To which they answered that by an annihilation nothing could be produced, and that the seeds of vegetables were so far from being annihilated in their productions, that they did rather numerously increase and multiply. For the division of one seed, said they, does produce numbers of seeds out of itself. But, replied the Empress, a particular part cannot increase of itself. 'Tis true, answered they, but they increase not barely of themselves, but by joining and commixing with other parts which do assist them in their productions, and by way of imitation form or figure their own parts into such or such particulars. Then I pray inform me, said the Empress, what disguise those seeds put on, and how they do conceal themselves in their transmutations. They answered that seeds did no ways disguise or conceal, but rather divulge themselves in the multiplication of their offspring. Only they did hide and conceal themselves from their sensitive perceptions, so that their figurative and productive motions were not perceptible by animal creatures. Again the Empress asked them whether there were any non-beings within the earth, to which they answered that they never heard of any such thing, and that if Her Majesty would know the truth thereof, she must ask those creatures that are called immaterial spirits, which had a great affinity with non-beings, and perhaps could give her a satisfactory answer to this question. Then she desired to be informed what opinion they had of the beginning of forms. They told Her Majesty that they did not understand what she meant by this expression. For, said they, there is no beginning in nature, no, not of particulars. By reason nature is eternal and infinite, and her particulars are subject to infinite changes and transmutations, by virtue of their own corporeal, figurative self-motions. So that there's nothing new in nature, not properly a beginning of anything. The Empress seemed well satisfied with all those answers, and inquired further whether there was no art used by those creatures that live within the earth. Yes, answered they, for the several parts of the earth do join and assist each other in composing or framing of such or such particulars. And many times there are factions and divisions, which cause productions of mixed species, as, for example, weeds instead of sweet flowers and useful fruits. But gardeners and husbandmen use often to decide their quarrels and cause them to agree, which though it shows a kindness to the differing parties, yet is a great prejudice to the worms and other animal creatures that live underground, for it is most commonly causes their dissolution and ruin. At best they are driven out of their habitations. What, said the Empress? Are not worms produced out of the earth? Their production in general, answered they, is like the production of all other natural creatures, proceeding from the corporeal figurative motions of nature. But as for their particular productions, they are, according to the nature of their species, some are produced out of flowers, some out of roots, some out of fruits, some out of ordinary earth. Then they are very ungrateful children, replied the Empress, that they feed on their own parents which gave them life. Their life, answered they, is their own and not their parents'. For no part or creature of nature can either give or take away life, but parts to only assist and join with parts, either in dissolution or production of other parts and creatures. After this and several other conferences which the Empress held with the worm-men, she dismissed them, and having taken much satisfaction in several of their answers, encouraged them in their studies and observations. Then she made a convocation of her chemists, the ape-men, and commanded them to give her an account of the several transmutations which their art was able to produce. They began first with a long and tedious discourse concerning the primitive ingredients of natural bodies, and how by their art they had found out the principles out of which they consist. But they did not all agree in their opinions, for some said that the principles of all natural bodies were the four elements, fire, air, water, earth, out of which they were composed. Others rejected this elementary commixture, and said there were many bodies out of which none of the four elements could be extracted by any degree of fire whatsoever, and that on the other side there were diverse bodies, whose resolution by fire reduced them into more than four different ingredients, and these affirmed that the only principles of natural bodies were salt, sulfur, and mercury. Others again declared that none of the aforementioned could be called the true principles of natural bodies, but that by their industry and pains which they had taken in the art of chemistry, they had discovered that all natural bodies were produced but from one principle, which was water. For all vegetables, minerals, and animals, said they, are nothing else but simple water distinguished into various figures by virtue of their seeds. But after a great many debates and contentions about this subject, the Empress, being so much tired that she was not able to hear them any longer, imposed a general silence upon them, and then declared herself in this following discourse. I am too sensible of the pains you have taken in the art of chemistry to discover the principles of natural bodies, and wished they had been more profitably bestowed upon some other than such experiments. For both by my own contemplation and the observations which I have made by my rational and sensitive perception upon nature and her works, I find that nature is but one infinite self-moving body, which by the virtue of its self-motion is divided into infinite parts, which parts being restless undergo perpetual changes and transmutations by their infinite compositions and divisions. Now if this be so, as surely according to regular sense and reason, it appears no otherwise. It is in vain to look for primary ingredients or constitutive principles of natural bodies, since there is no more but one universal principle of nature, to wit, self-moving matter, which is the only cause of all natural effects. Next, I desire you to consider that fire is but a particular creature or effect of nature, and occasions not only different effects in several bodies, but on some bodies has no power at all. Witness gold, which could never be brought yet to change its interior figure by the art of fire. And if this be so, why should you be so simple as to believe that fire can show you the principles of nature, and that neither the four elements, nor water only, nor salt, sulphur, and mercury, all which are no more but particular effects and creatures of nature, should be the primitive ingredients of principles of all natural bodies? Wherefore I will not have you take more pains, and waste your time in such fruitless attempts, but be wiser hereafter, and busy yourselves with such experiments as may be beneficial to the public. The Empress, having thus declared her mind to the ape-men, and given them better instructions than perhaps they expected, not knowing that her Majesty had such great and able judgment in natural philosophy, had several conferences with them concerning chemical preparations, which for brevity's sake I'll forbear to rehearse. Amongst the rest, she asked how it came that the imperial race appeared so young, and yet was reported to have lived so long, some of them 2, some 3, and some 400 years, and whether it was by nature or by a special divine blessing. To which they answered that there was a certain rock in the parts of the world which contained the golden sands, which rock was hollow within, and did produce a gum that was 100 years before it came to its full strength and perfection. This gum, said they, if it be held in a warm hand, will dissolve into an oil, the effects whereof are following. It being given every day for some certain time to an old decayed man, in the bigness of a little pea. This relation amazed the Empress very much, for though in the world she came from she had heard great reports of the philosopher's stone, yet had she not heard of any that had ever found it out, which made her believe that it was but a chimera. She called also to mind that there had been in the same world a man who had a little stone which cured all kinds of diseases outward and inward, according it was applied, and that a famous chemist had found out a certain liquor called alkahest, which by the virtue of its own fire consumed all diseases. But she had never heard of a medicine that could renew old age and render it beautiful, vigorous, and young. Nor would she have so easily believed it, had it been a medicine prepared by art. For she knew that art, being nature's changeling, was not able to produce such a powerful effect. But being that the gum did grow naturally, she did not much scruple at it, for she knew that nature's works are so various and wonderful, that no particular creature is able to trace her ways. The conferences of the chemists being finished, the Empress made an assembly of her Galenical physicians, her herbalists and anatomists, and first she inquired of her herbalists the particular effects of several herbs and drugs, and whence they proceeded. To which they answered that they could, for the most part, tell Her Majesty the virtues and operations of them, but the particular causes of their effects were unknown, Only thus much they could say, that their operations and virtues were generally caused by the proper inherent corporeal figurative motions, which being infinitely various in infinite nature did produce infinite several effects. And it is observed, said they, that herbs and drugs are as wise in their operations as men in their words and actions, nay wiser, and their effects are more certain than men in their opinions. For though they cannot discourse like men, yet they have the sense and reason, as well as men. For the discursive faculty is but a particular effect of sense and reason in some particular creatures, to wit men, and not a principle of nature, and argues often more folly than wisdom. The Empress asked whether they could not, by a composition and commixture of other drugs, make them work other effects than they did, used by themselves. They answered that they could make them produce artificial effects, but not alter their inherent, proper, and particular natures. Then the Empress commanded her anatomists to dissect such kinds of creatures as are called monsters. But they answered Her Majesty that it would be but an unprofitable and useless work, and hinder their better employments. For when we dissect dead animals, said they, it is for no other end, but to do observe what defects and distempers they had, that we may cure the like in living ones. So that all our care and industry concerns only the preservation of mankind. But we hope your Majesty will not preserve monsters, which are most commonly destroyed, except it be for novelty. Neither will the dissection of monsters prevent the errors of nature's irregular actions, for by dissecting some we cannot prevent the production of others, so that our pains and labour will be to no purpose, unless to satisfy the vain curiosities of inquisitive men. The Empress replied that such dissections would be very beneficial to experimental philosophers. If experimental philosophers, answered they, do spend their time in such useless inspections, they waste it in vain, and have nothing but labour for their pains. Lastly, Her Majesty had some conferences with the Galenic physicians about several diseases, and amongst the rest, desired to know the cause and nature of apoplexies and the spotted plague. They answered that a deadly apoplexy was a dead palsy of the brain, and a spotted plague was a gangrene of the vital parts. And as the gangrene of outward parts did strike inwardly, so the gangrene of inward parts did break forth outwardly. Which is the cause, said they, that as soon as the spots appear, death follows. For then it is an infallible sign that the body is throughout infected with a gangrene, which is a spreading evil. But some gangrenes do spread more suddenly than others, and of all sorts of gangrenes, the plaguey gangrene is the most infectious. For other gangrenes infect but the next adjoining parts of one particular body, and having killed that creature, go no further, but cease. When as the gangrene of the plague infects not only the adjoining parts of one particular creature, but also those that are distant. That is, one particular body infects another, and so breeds a universal contagion. But the Empress, being very desirous to know in what manner the plague was propagated, became so contagious, asked whether it went actually out of one body into another. To which they answered that it was a great dispute among the learned of their profession, whether it came by division and composition of parts, that is, by expiration and inspiration, or whether it was caused by imitation. Some experimental philosophers said they will make us believe that by the help of their microscopes they have observed the plague to be a body of little flies like atoms, which go out of one body into another through the sensitive passages. But the most experienced and wisest of our society have rejected this opinion as a ridiculous fancy, and do, for the most part, believe that it is caused by an imitation of parts, so that the motions of some parts, which are sound, do imitate the motions of those that are infected, and that by this means the plague becomes contagious and spreading. The Empress, having hitherto spent her time in the examination of the bird, fish, worm, and ape-men, etc., and received several intelligences from their several employments, at last had a mind to divert herself after her serious discourses, and therefore she sent for the spider-men, who were her mathematicians, the lice-men, who were her geometricians, and the magpie, parrot, and jackdaw men, who were orators and logicians. The spider-men came first, and presented Her Majesty with a table full of mathematical points and lines, and figures of all sorts, of squares, circles, triangles, and the like, which the Empress, notwithstanding that she had a very ready wit and quick apprehension, could not understand. But the more she endeavoured to learn, the more was she confounded. Whether they did ever square the circle I cannot exactly tell, nor whether they could make imaginary points and lines. But this I dare say, that their points and lines were so slender, small and thin, that they seemed next to imaginary. The mathematicians were in a great esteem with the Empress, as being not only the chief tutors and instructors in many arts, but some of them excellent magicians and informers of spirits, which was the reason their characters were so abstruse and intricate, that the Empress knew not what to make of them. There is so much to learn in your art, said she, that I can neither spare time from other affairs to busy myself in your profession now. Nor, if I could, do I think I should ever be able to understand your imaginary points, lines, and figures, because they are non-beings. Then came the lice-men, and endeavoured to measure all things to a hair's breadth, and weigh them to an atom. But their weights would seldom agree, especially in the weighing of air, which they found a task impossible to be done. At which the Empress began to be displeased, and told them there was neither truth nor justice in their profession, and so dissolved their society. After this, the Empress was resolved to hear the magpie, parrot, and jackdaw men, which were her professed orators and logicians. Whereupon one of the parrot men rose with a great formality, and endeavoured to make an eloquent speech before Her Majesty. But before he had half ended, his arguments and divisions being so many, that they caused a great confusion in his brain, he could not go forward, but was forced to retire backwards, with a great disgrace both to himself and the whole society. And although one of his brethren endeavoured to second him by another speech, yet was he as far to seek as the former. At which the Empress appeared not a little troubled, and told them that they followed too much the rules of art, and confounded themselves with too nice formalities and distinctions. But since I know, said she, that you are a people who have naturally voluble tongues and good memories, I desire you to consider more the subject you speak of, than your artificial periods, connections, and parts of speech, and leave the rest to your natural eloquence. Which they did, and so became very eminent orators. Lastly, Her Imperial Majesty, being desirous to know what progress her logicians had made in the art of disputing, commanded them to argue upon several themes or subjects, which they did. And having made a very nice discourse of logistical terms and propositions, entered into a dispute by way of syllogistical arguments, through all the figures and modes. One began with an argument of the first mode of the first figure. Thus, every politician is wise, every knave is a politician, therefore every knave is wise. Another contradicted him with a syllogism of the second mode of the same figure. Thus, no politician is wise, every knave is a politician, therefore no knave is wise. The third made an argument in the third mode of the same figure, after this manner. Every politician is wise. Some knaves are politicians, therefore some knaves are wise. The fourth concluded with a syllogism in the fourth mode of the same figure. Thus, no politician is wise. Some knaves are politicians, therefore some knaves are not wise. After this they took another subject, and one propounded this syllogism. Every philosopher is wise. Every beast is wise. Therefore every beast is a philosopher. But another said that this argument was false. Therefore he contradicted him with a syllogism of the second figure of the fourth mode. Thus, every philosopher is wise. Some beasts are not wise. Therefore some beasts are not philosophers. Thus they argued, and intended to go on. But the Empress interrupted them. I have enough, said she, of your chopped logic, and will hear no more of your syllogisms, for it disorders my reason and puts my brain on the rack. Your formal argumentations are able to spoil all natural wit, and I'll have you to consider that art does not make reason, but reason makes art, and therefore as much as reason is above art, so much is a natural or rational discourse to be preferred before an artificial. For art is, for the most part, irregular, and disorders men's understandings more than it rectifies them, and leads them into a labyrinth where they'll never get out, and makes them dull and unfit for useful employments. Especially your art of logic, which consists only in contradicting each other, and making sophisms and obscuring truth instead of clearing it. But they replied to Her Majesty that the knowledge of nature, that is, natural philosophy, would be imperfect without the art of logic, and that there was an improbable truth which could no otherwise be found out than by the art of disputing. Truly, said the Empress, I do believe that it is with the natural philosophy, as it is with all other effects of nature, for no particular knowledge can be perfect. By reason knowledge is dividable as well as composable. Nay, to speak properly, nature herself cannot boast of any perfection, but God himself, because there are so many irregular motions in nature, and 'tis but a folly to think that an art should be able to regulate them, since art itself is for the most part irregular. But as for improbable truth, I know not what your meaning is, for truth is more than improbability. Nay, there is so much difference between truth and improbability, that I cannot conceive it possible how they can be joined together. In short, said she, I do no ways approve of your profession, and though I will not dissolve your society, yet I shall never take delight in hearing you any more. Wherefore confine your disputations to your schools, lest besides the commonwealth of learning they disturb also divinity and policy, religion and laws, and by that means draw an utter ruin and destruction upon both the church and the state. After the Empress had thus finished the discourses and conferences with the mentioned societies of her virtuosos, she considered by herself the manner of their religion, and finding it very defective was troubled, that so wise and knowing a people should have no more knowledge of the divine truth. Wherefore she consulted with her own thoughts, whether it was possible to convert them all to her own religion. And to that end she resolved to build churches, and make also up a congregation of women, wherefore she intended to be the head herself, and to instruct them in several points of her religion. This she had no sooner begun, but the women, which generally had quick wits, subtle conceptions, and clear understandings, and solid judgments, became, in short time, very devout and zealous sisters, for the Empress had an excellent gift of preaching, and instructed them in the articles of faith. And by that means she converted them not only soon, but gained an extraordinary love of all her subjects throughout that world. But at last, pondering with herself the inconstant nature of mankind, and fearing that in time they would grow weary and desert the divine truth, following their own fancies and living according to their own desires, she began to be troubled that her labours and pains should prove of so little effect, and therefore studied all manner of ways to prevent it. Amongst the rest, she called to mind a relation which the birdmen had made her once, of a mountain that did burn in flames of fire, and thereupon did immediately send for the wisest and subtlest of her worm-men, commanding them to discover the cause of the eruption of that same fire, which they did, and having dived to the very bottom of the mountain, informed her Majesty that there was a certain sort of stone, whose nature was such that being wetted it would grow excessively hot, and break forth into a flaming fire until it became dry, and then it ceased from burning. The Empress was glad to hear this news, and forthwith desired the worm-men to bring her some of that stone, but be sure to keep it secret. She sent also for the birdmen and asked them whether they could not get her a piece of the sunstone. They answered that it was impossible, unless they did spoil or lessen the light of the world. But, said they, if it please your Majesty, we can demolish one of the numerous stars of the sky, which the world will never miss. And with the decision to destroy a star, I think I'm going to call it a night. As always, if you want to pick up where we're leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe or follow in whatever service you use so that you get the new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.